The recording is in progress.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Unity Health Network. I am Prophet Anyanwu Cox. I'm registered as a registered nurse in the state of Missouri, and I have my master's in instructional technology. Today, I'm also a community educator, health educator, and have been for 30 plus years. I'm an instilled elder with my local community as well as the national community. I'm a holistic practitioner for over 30 years as well, a wellness coach and an ordained minister. The Unity Health Network is a global health strategy subgroup of the Global Unity Network as managed by the CSF Development Group. Its focus is on healthcare learning delivered through a virtual collaborative education and training platform. It's dedicated to the optimal health and wellness in mind, body, and spirit of all humanity and all divine creation. And so we began, I always like to begin from my own African-centered culture with an opening honoring culture, history, and ancestry. So we began with the talking drums from Ghana as our opening.
Just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. It's been too hard living, and I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. A change is gonna come. A change will come. A change is gonna come. Oh, and I go to the movies, and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. Then I go to my brother. I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me down.
And so I included this particular one because I saw a video the other day on WhatsApp of some dancers, Zulu dancers, that was so impressive. And so this is some African-American youth in the diaspora who remembers, we say R with a dash, members reconnect with their ancestry. And as you watch closely, hopefully you will see how it has a healing aspect in mind, body, and spirit. They're calling out the names of those who have died at the hands of the police. So hopefully you are able to see more than just the tap, that the power of releasing. It also happens in a similar manner in a lot of Black churches in terms of working out stress and trauma and things that we are powerless over. So many names, so many deaths in the community by police. So today our topic is a comprehensive and integrative approach to optimal health across the lifespan, and that's mind, body, and spirit. Mind, including the emotional aspect where we deal with trauma, crisis in our lives. Body and spirit, non-specific for religious preference, through health equity, which includes equity not only in the ability to get the treatment in hospitals and pharmaceuticals, but also health equity in being able to use traditional complementary alternative and integrative treatments as an option for all people based on informed consent, which is a key that we'll touch on today. The agenda today, I posted on WhatsApp, has been shifted a bit because originally I was going to cover some more about the I Am Amore pilot project. However, as I began to work on this and realizing this is really an opportunity for health education, which I've done for over 30 years, and that many people really don't have time to drill down into certain topics and to see what's going on with health and wellness, their own, as well as their communities. So we're going to look at some health topics, and I forgot my L in my health topics that are critical, but also want some recommendations from those who are present so that as we go forward, we're going to do this as an ongoing, I don't want to call it a series because I'm not sure when it might end, but ongoing platform where we can really take a look at some of the things that affect communities. And so we're looking at critical aspects for optimal health. There are those who have come into the world with different levels of what we might call health and wholeness, but actually we all come in with the ability to have optimal health. And so we've seen that in Olympics and all of that, that once we maximize our potential, that we can do a lot more. So in underserved populations and in vulnerable communities, what is needed, areas where knowledge and research would be beneficial to support informed consent, which is a critical piece. We'll cover a little of that today. And what is the way forward for disease prevention? Because we know prevention is better than a cure. So the whole discussion between traditional, complementary, alternative, integrative, and all that. At the same time, there's some things we can do to prevent certain conditions. And in the world we're in today, still not quite totally free of a pandemic. We want to look at how to go forward and stay as healthy as possible. This meeting is scheduled to be 2 hours to end at 1. Ideally, would like to be able to end by 11:30. So 11:30 my time, or an hour and a half, 90 minutes. So let me move forward. And everyone is pretty familiar, hopefully, with the United Nations Sustainable Goals. The Unity Health Network focuses on good health and well-being, which actually, as we look at this chart, could involve, could cover topics, of course, clean water has to do with, and sanitation, of course, has to do with health and well-being, gender equality, because if we put mental health in here, it also covers, so mind, body, and spirit, it covers a lot of these different issues. So decent work, economic growth. The economic piece allows us to get the food that we need, healthy food to stay healthy. So you get the general idea that a lot of these really do apply. So moving right along to some critical things, we're going to start with, because I can't see, I don't know if anyone is on, I don't think I've let anyone in that is directly tied to apartheid in South Africa, or how many even are familiar with medical apartheid. This is the longest video I have on here today. It's about 15 minutes. I think the rest are 2 or 3 minutes, or maybe 4 minutes. But I want to cover some topics today before we get into the questioning. So I would like for you to take whatever notes you need to, because you should have at least, I'm hoping, 40 minutes to give your input on what topics you would like to see. Again, we're talking about health. So just laying some foundation today for some critical information related to health that I have found just in conversations on the local and national level that most people are not aware of. This particular piece by Harriet Washington, she was a guest with one of the federal projects I'm a part of, and nobody was aware of her work. So at least leaving this session today, you'll be aware of Harriet Washington, her work. She's done several books. She is quite accomplished as an author, but also as a researcher. So we add her along with the mental health researchers that I shared the last time. So it becomes a part of how we build this particular sector, the health network, is that we try to be as up to date and informed as possible. And I say in both sides, because I like to study what I agree with and what I disagree with. That's the way I think that anytime there's a war, you know yourself and you know what's working against you. So we'll start with this. And I put a challenge out there. I was going to donate to the tree planting. I'm still trying to figure out how I could do that. But then I thought I'd put a challenge out here. And this is not for the leaders of the network. This is for individuals in 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 their communities that, because I found this particular book is difficult to get through just because of the content, even though it is true and factual, and but it's just very hard to get through. But it also comes on Audible. So,
my name is Harriet Washington. I'm a writer, medical ethicist. I wrote a book entitled Medical Apartheid, which was the first comprehensive social history of research with African Americans. And it dealt with not only history of medicine, but also with social ills, racism. And a lot of my work has also focused on the intersection of ethics, history, and race in this country as it pertains to medical practices. It's a special interest of mine. I also do some teaching. I teach a bioethics course at Columbia University and lecture widely in this country and abroad about medical ethics issues, everything from conspiracy theories to the erosion of informed consent. And I find a great deal to keep me occupied. I was very happy to be invited back to EVMS. I lecture at many medical schools and institutions across the country, but this one always stayed in my mind. I had especially warm memories of it, and I find it a really exciting place because of the progress and the focus on issues of medicine and medical practice and medical care that go beyond the clinical classwork and the clinical issues. The issues are embedded in our society, and they dramatically affect how people's health waxes and wanes. And this is a school, an institution that has always taken this to heart, has always understood that one can't treat people in isolation in a clinic or in a hospital bed, that the entire person has to be addressed. And that means addressing some unfortunate aspects of our society. And anyway, it's always had a special place in my heart, and I'm very happy to be back here. It's hard to know what first piqued my interest in looking at the history of ethics as it pertained to African Americans and their treatment by the medical institutions in this country. But I know that my initial desire to be a physician and working in hospitals for over 10 years certainly sharpened that interest. I saw many things that troubled me and disturbed me, many questions I had about the interactions between individual patients and clinicians. And I actually found that clinicians were often very open about discussing with me their own trepidation about the way they felt constrained to treat patients. But it was a really interesting experience I had that I recount in Medical Apartheid when I was running a poison control center in a hospital in upstate New York. We were allowed to have extra space that was ceded to us by radiology. And I also found an old file cabinet that I knew I could use in my office. So I'm opening this file cabinet, cleaning it out, and I found all these old filed folders of patients that had been forgotten. And being who I am, I read every last one of them, of course. And I was struck by the fact that these were patients who were being considered for kidney transplantation. But their files looked different, and the differences seemed to be assorted according to race. The files of the black patients were very thin, and those of the white patients were fatter. It's because the ones of the white patients had reams and reams of documentation about their social history, positive. They had positive support from family and friends about their insurance that made them able to pay for this kind of procedure, and bolstering their claim, for a new kidney, called the social profile. The social profiles of the other patients, the black ones, everyone had the word Negro stamped on it, and they were thinner. Although, in particular, I saw one file that were a gentleman who had insurance, had a loving family like the other patients, and yet the plan for this patient was not to help him find an organ, but to help him prepare for his imminent demise. And I thought, is it race that's separating these patients from a kidney that they need to live? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it certainly looked suspicious, and I had to know more. I think that triggered my interest. After that, I began looking everywhere to see whether or not black and white patients were being treated equally with the same access to life-saving technologies. And dismayingly often, I saw that they were not. I wasn't a writer then. That's the interesting thing. I was running a poison control center, but when I became a writer, I knew it would be the first book that I felt passionately about, and it was. After I had the opportunity to train in medical ethics, I spent 2.5 years training in medical ethics, and one of the questions I had was that there was one study, and seemingly only one study, that was acknowledged and well known among many people, in which African Americans were mistreated, and that was a Tuskegee study. But I had already learned from my own curiosity, my own research, that there had been many, many studies, many of them, in fact, most of them, much worse than Tuskegee. Studies in which African Americans were actively harmed, killed even, and I wondered why Tuskegee had such root in the American psyche, and I quickly realized it's because that's all people know about. Very often I would ask people about research with African Americans, clinical people, historians, people who should know, and they would only say Tuskegee. You're asking about Tuskegee, right? I'm like, no, I'm asking about everything else. I realized people did not know this history at all. And I went to international conference in Lübeck, Germany, of historians of medicine focused on medical experimentation in the 20th century. And they all said that only Tuskegee had harmed African Americans. I knew that wasn't true. So I began realizing the consequences of not understanding that there had been scores and scores of abusive medical research with African Americans over the decades. The consequences are that very often Tuskegee was dismissed as a terrible thing that happened, but it was accorded, the fears of African Americans to engage in medical research were accorded to Tuskegee. Well, they don't want to engage in medical research because they're overreacting to Tuskegee. It was called an overreaction to a single study, and I knew that wasn't true. I knew that people were actually reacting to centuries of abuse, and I thought it was really important to document that because nobody else had. When I went to the medical libraries in Europe and in the US, prestigious organizations like Harvard's Countway Library, you would find shelves filled.
I have somebody listed twice. I don't know what that is.
Never mind. Go ahead.
Okay.
Filled with abuses toward whites and other groups.
Okay.
But nothing on the abuse of African Americans, nothing in books. But when I went to the basement and looked at the medical journals from the 18th, 19th century, I saw plenty there, but it was episodic. And I thought someone
Okay.
One needs to pull this together so that people will understand that there's an entire canon of abusive research with African Americans. So people will stop dismissing it as a myth when these were actually all too real. And that's what I did. You know, it would have been good if I could have said the book ended with Tuskegee, that we had learned everything that we should have learned, but we didn't at all. So what's happened is that we have many, many abuses after Tuskegee, at least as many after Tuskegee as beforehand. And there is not a sphere of American medicine that has gone untouched. Radiation experiments, you know, experiments with children, reproductive abuse and experimentation. It's everywhere. Any sphere in which there's an interaction of African Americans with the system, you're going to find their abuse by the system. And in research settings, it was even more prevalent because in research settings, unlike therapeutic settings, there's a laissez-faire attitude often reigned. The interesting thing is that today we comfort ourselves that we have this matrix of laws that protect research subjects, and we do. That's a good thing. But laws are only as good as the people who enforce them and adhere to them. And all too often the laws are not being adhered to, and even more often we are passing laws now that actually erode informed consent, that reduce people's right to say yes or no in medical research. And when we do that, African Americans are often the most frequent victims of that. So unfortunately, although we do not engage in the most horrific physical abuses of the 18th and 19th centuries, we still do have many, many research studies that are ethically problematic and frankly abusive. So we still have not learned everything that we should have. The most valuable takeaway for students is to understand that they are the people with the least power and the most to lose by implicitly or explicitly criticizing the system, criticizing their professors, criticizing the way medicine is performed. And yet it's absolutely critical that they have the courage to speak up if they think they see something wrong. There are several reasons for that. One reason is that medical students have, in my opinion, a privileged perspective. They're still not completely socialized as doctors. So they still are able to see things from a layperson's point of view. And frankly, most doctors lose that eventually. It's part of the training. And it's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you're socialized into a profession and you gain, frankly, so much more. But as medical students, you still have both worlds. You know, you're training as a physician, you have that perspective, but you can still see things from a layperson's perspective. Sometimes only you can see that something is wrong. Sometimes only you can be sensitive enough to understand that something can be abusive. And it's critically important to speak up, even though it's risky, even though it might cost you something, because you may be the only one seeing this wrong, and you may even be successful. You may even convince your attendings, your superiors, your colleagues that they need to reevaluate a practice or reevaluate a stance. So in that way, you can, and students have been, extremely important in advancing ethical thinking in medicine. I'm thinking, for example, of a group of London students. When I was studying medical ethics, in London, there were a few students who were being asked to do, as students had been asked to do for decades before them, you're going to learn to do a pelvic examination by practicing on this unconscious woman. She's been prepped for another surgery. She's unconscious. Now's your chance. Learn how to do a pelvic. And some students said, no, I don't want to do this. She hasn't given her permission. She's not awake, which means if I don't know what I'm doing, should I hurt her? She can't even tell me. It's wrong. They convinced their attending, they convinced people in their hospital. That hospital stopped allowing this practice. Other hospitals fell in suit, and in this country, some hospitals also no longer allow this. So their vision actually changed the practice of medicine, and that's the most important thing I have to say to the medical students. I had hoped when I wrote this book that it would inspire other people, especially historians of medicine, to write about some of the issues that I addressed. I hoped, it had been my dream, that this would actually be viewed as a new, I don't know, become a new canon in the history of medicine, that people would explore this history. And I've seen that happen. There's now been a book published on the, I did a chapter on the fate of African Americans immediately around the time of the Civil War. And there's been a book published on that very subject. I did a section of the book where I talked about the government's propensity for supporting psychiatrists who are looking into a connection between violence and race. And Jonathan Metzl, wrote a book, The Protest Psychosis, that deals exactly with that. So I'm seeing more and more. Very recently, the New York Times has started a brilliant new series, 1619, to commemorate the 400 years since Africans first set foot on the continent. And in this series, the first session of the series, I'm reading it, and I felt like I was reading my book. I mean, the story of John Brown, which I tell in my book, is there. The story about the vaccination by Onesimus. I mean, all these things I had written in my book 12 years earlier are now in the New York Times, you know, and everyone's reading them. And that's made me very happy. That's what I want to see. I want to see more and more people delve into this history, and more importantly, what this history can tell us about what's going on today. How we can interpret events today in the light of our history to understand and hopefully not repeat the mechanisms that bring them to bear. Since I wrote Medical Apartheid, I've written several other books, and one of them had to do with the pharmaceutical industry and its commercialization of medicine and medical research. But I've been focusing more lately on cognitive effects of medical injuries. I wrote a book called Infectious Madness, where I talked about pathogens and their role in mental disease. And a very recently published book is about environmental toxicity, environmental racism, and its cognitive effects. I mean, we all know that lead causes brain damage. We all know that heavy metals like mercury and arsenic also do that. But I write about the fact that pathogens, pesticides, even banned pesticides, and PCBs and industrial chemicals all take their toll on human minds. And environmental racism means that they're taking a greater toll on people of color than they are on whites, and all that means. So I started by talking about intelligence, IQ testing, what it really means, what it really tests, and then I go on to explain and document how exposure to all these noxious chemicals and pathogens is affecting our intelligence, our collective intelligence, but is disproportionately victimizing African Americans. So that's my current obsession.
Okay, so one of the big topics today, and I'll continue, and then I'll stop all my piece of it and just open up for some dialogue on topics to go forward with. That's really just sort of this is laying a foundation for some issues that will fit within everything that we do. The informed consent, she mentioned that it looks like in her research that that's being eroded. Let's see what I wanted to get a definition, a working definition. I think this one does a good job to some degree.
Hey everyone, this is Jay Ferg, and in this video I'm going to talk about one of the most important ethical and legal requirements in modern medical care, informed consent. In my last video, I shared the story of Martin Salgo and the first time the term informed consent was used publicly, but now I'm going to get into the details of informed consent itself. In general, informed consent is when a patient voluntarily agrees to a proposed medical intervention or treatment after being reasonably informed about said intervention or treatment. Valid informed consent has 3 requirements. First, it must be voluntary. Second, it must be informed. And third, the individual must be capable of giving their consent. I'm going to start with the easiest one first. A patient's consent must be voluntary. It cannot be forced, it cannot be coerced, and it cannot be manipulated. Consent must be given freely. Second, consent must be informed. A patient must have enough information to make a good decision. This part gets a little bit tricky. There isn't an algorithm to determine what is considered enough information. As one would expect, every patient has a different level of knowledge coming into an appointment, and many treatments or interventions have different factors that ought to be stated or emphasized. In each individual case, more or less information may be required, and different details may need to be pointed out. While there isn't an explicit method, it is typically understood that a healthcare professional has adequately informed a patient if the patient has been given as much information as a reasonable person would need to make the decision under similar circumstances. Using that standard in the broadest sense, it's safe to assume a patient needs more information than just being told that the treatment is good, but likely doesn't require so much information that the entire appointment is spent reading 20 years of research papers. A helpful introductory guide of information that a reasonable person would need consists of the nature of the treatment or intervention, the expected benefits, the risks and side effects, the likely consequences of not having the treatment or intervention, and any alternative courses of action. So if someone goes to see their doctor about a flu vaccine, the patient needs to know it's an injection, that it will help prevent the flu, that the common risks are some aches and pains as well as some soreness around the site of the injection, and a rarer risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome. They need to know that if they don't get the flu vaccine, they will be more likely to get the flu, and there might be alternative options to the injection, like a nasal spray. From there, unique attributes of the case ought to be addressed. Perhaps the treatment is very new, and the risks and side effects are poorly understood. Perhaps the intervention is not covered by insurance, but a less effective option is. Details such as these, as well as answering any questions the patient may have, need to be brought up because they are important for the patient to make their decision. Finally, a patient must be capable of giving consent. This means the patient must understand the information they have been given. Informed consent is not valid if the patient has been told all of the relevant information but didn't understand a word they were told. The patient must also be able to appreciate the reasonable foreseeable consequences of their decision or lack of decision. They need to be able to use the information they were given to balance the risks and benefits of their choice. There are different ways of assessing and addressing capacity depending on where you are, but I'm going to get into that in my next video. So those are the 3 requirements for obtaining informed consent. It must be voluntary, it must be informed, and the patient must be capable of giving their consent.
Move on to the next one really quick. So you got that pretty clearly. I'm a guardian last year. I was DPOA for my sister. So the idea that sometimes people are not in a position. I'm gonna try to make this, I think this is about 3 minutes, make it short, but this actually, I think is something from Canada that I'm going to tie in with something, and then I'll be opening it up.
Half of all Canadians will either need blood or know someone who will need blood at some point in their lives. Yet, Canada, like many similar countries, suffers from a crisis in available blood for transfusions. That's why we should all pay attention to a trial the British National Health Service has just announced, and it will begin in 2017. Patients who volunteer will be given a synthetic blood product made from stem cells. So could this lead to a revolution in healthcare? Our CBC medical columnist, Dr. Peter Lynn, joins us with his take on this. Dr. Lynn, this really does sound like something out of a science fiction book or a movie. How real is it, and do we need such a thing as synthetic blood?
I know that sounds terrible, but it sounds kind of cool at the same time. I remember in medical school, we were always dreaming about some different way of giving people blood products because we would run out every so often at the hospitals with all these car accidents and things like that. And so the thought of having something synthetic has always been around. Actually, if you go back to the 1600s, they tried to replace blood with beer. Now that didn't work very well. Wow. And then about 300 years later, we finally figured out that there's blood types and things like that, and we just can't mix bloods together. And so now what they're thinking about is, what about taking stem cells cells that can act as little factories. So they'll just start producing, type A blood or type B blood or O blood or whatever you need. And that way we have a constant supply instead of waiting for people to donate, which is fantastic, but that's a hit and miss along the way. And that's really what they're thinking about, is having this synthetic blood. They're pushing it off till 2017 when this study is going to start. And the thought is they will give about 20 people sort of this man-made red blood cells, I guess, if you will, and then see how that works. And then eventually they're going to use it for the rarest of the blood types, where we can't match their blood up pretty well with the traditional way. So then they're hoping to make them some blood along the way.
If this works, would it be revolutionary?
Yeah, you can imagine we could have little factories kind of, producing these things, so then we would never run out of the stuff. It would be very clean because we can sterilize everything and we don't have to wait for donations to come in. And in certain countries where, let's say, HIV is very rampant, you can't actually rely on donations. And so therefore, this would be a huge boon in terms of how we can manage the blood crisis.
When could we see it potentially here in Canada?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we have lots of things moving around. The Army is even interested in this because they want to figure out how they can get blood products and things like that. Health Canada, of course, will have to make sure it's safe for us and look it over. But you know what the biggest problem is manufacturing this stuff.
Right.
So it turns out 2 drops of blood has 1 billion red blood cells in it, 2 drops. Wow. Now, if I were to make 1 blood cell every second, it would take me 31 years to make 1 billion. So that's a bit of a problem. So that's why the government has given people, you got 2 years, everybody work on this hard. Yeah. And some of them have figured out how to make large volumes of these things. And you could see this, first of all, start off in very, very small trials to make sure it's safe. And then what you're going to see is slowly it's going to go from the rarest cases of patients, and I think this will cover everybody eventually. So therefore, until that happens, though, you got to keep donating, okay? Yeah. So right now it's going to be a while. So continue to donate and continue to donate regularly because blood only lasts.
So I'm going to drop that for a second. Harriet Washington talked about eroding informed consent. I like what Canada's doing. They said they have to make sure it's safe. They're taking their time. They're taking baby steps to see what needs to happen. Yet, in the United States in 2005, there was put forth a trial of artificial blood, synthetic blood, that actually was allowed to exist in 26 hospitals without informed consent. So I just thought I'd put that out there. So when I say learn both sides, he was very convincing. Had I seen that video a few years ago, I was very impressed with the way that it was going to be safe. It was going to take baby steps. And they would have volunteers. He highlighted those. Those were some key pieces. That was in Canada, and I think he said UK. With the United States, and Harriet Washington has this study, because when I didn't meet her, I was on a conference call with her. Had she heard about this polyheme? I was sitting at a table years ago at some meeting somewhere, and I saw a woman across the table with a band on, and because I'm extremely nosy sometimes, I asked her what was the band? It wasn't diabetes, it wasn't epilepsy or seizures, what was it? She said the band was to keep her from getting artificial blood. And I said, get out of here, what are you talking about? There's no such thing. She said, yes, there is. If you have a trauma and go into a hospital, a particular hospital, you could actually be given it artificial blood without your consent. Now, as a nurse, I know we always had to get papers signed, but she said, no, there's a waiver within the FDA. So again, across Africa, I'm showing this too, because I don't know what part, I don't know enough about the governments in Africa to know like the difference between Canada and the United States. But the United States gave permission, I read, for like 26 hospitals. Harriet Washington informed me that in her book, she talks about 30, that if someone comes in needing blood, they did not need to ask permission to give artificial blood. If you had a blue band on your arm, then they would not give it to you. But if you didn't know to get the blue band, like so many people, then you got it. Now, that was back 2005, 6, 7, somewhere 2008. That trial was stopped suddenly. And I can only assume that it hadn't gone very well because they stopped it. The company went out of business. They went bankrupt. And obviously something had gone wrong. Now, I asked her if she thought it was these hospitals in 26 states, they were allowed to occur. We have 50 states and 7 territories, but out of 50 states, 26 clinical trials that were unknown to the participants. 2 of those were in a zip code that I worked in a hospital. So 2 hospitals in the same zip code in Detroit, rather than 1 hospital in 26 states. So anyway, just interesting. I wanted to cover all that on informed consent because even as health, I forgot the title, Miss Lisa, but anyway, the research, it would be just great to have individuals who could drill down into some of these topics. But if you would start with the book, I think that, matter of fact, I think your researchers, if a part of their participating in some of what we're doing, if one of the requirements is for them to complete that book, it's on Audible. You can get it on Amazon, but it's hard to finish because there's so many things. And so going forward in terms of health and well-being, sustainability, like with the sustainable goals and all of that, we want to make sure that we're well informed. So now at this point, that was my piece to throw in there. It's a little longer than I expected it to be, but what I'd like to do at this point is the questions. Let me go back and open that up again. The questions for, open this back up again, for everyone, so we can begin to put together what information, I'll go back to that at some point, but this is, since we're kind of over my time, and if we go ahead and do this 6 to 8 weeks, I have so much that could be covered. So we know what the focus of this particular Global Unity Network is, and we know what it's dedicated to. And so this particular first meeting is to find out from different representatives and different populations and countries across Africa or wherever, since I think this covers anywhere, as areas where knowledge and research would be beneficial, as well as what are some critical issues of health for underserved and vulnerable populations. And I'm not taking notes, and we don't have a note taker. And what do we need to do, a way forward to do some prevention? So anything that you would like to see be brought to the table as we continue to do these sessions, what kinds of things, what kinds of discussions, what topics, anybody can jump in, and it's being recorded so that we'll have a record of what it is. And I see Prince Andrew's hand up. Yes, sir.
Yes, only that I'm going to briefly share my screen to do a commercial interjection. I don't have here a visual for today's presentation, but just for editing purposes, I'm just going to insert this now, and we can later replace this with a Global Unity Net graphic. But at the moment, I just want to insert this as a breaking point for your presentation and the follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see Dr. Rusli, please.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions actually.
Oh, okay.
Regarding the consent, usually when we have an operation, for example, the consent is given to you just before you are being operated or something. So you don't even have a chance to know what's going to be, the risk and everything. And seem to be, according to that consent, whatever they do is, whatever the doctor do seems to be, we cannot do anything in terms of, if there's some error or something. How is that to be corrected?
Well, the fact is that informed consent is supposed to be in place for whatever you take, whether it's surgery. And so I understand what you're saying. The difficulty, this is why I like being able to be a part of this Unity Health, is to just let people know that you do have a right. I was at a medical conference recently, and there was a doctor who's, he had a baby or grandbaby or something, just still in the nursery. And they wanted to give the baby a HPV vaccine, for hepatitis B, I guess it was. And he said, no. And they said, well, you have to. He said, I do not have to. So once you know your rights, then, you just say no. But again, as the general public, we're kind of taught, well, if they know best, then I don't have a choice, but that's actually not true. So one example, my sister who passed Thanksgiving Day when I'm in Kansas, she was in Michigan, and they called me. They wanted a verbal consent. Now you're supposed to have a written consent, but they said, we'll take your verbal. She's in the ER and we want your consent. I said, to do what? Well, just your consent for us to do treatment. Well, I asked what kind of treatment? Well, they didn't want to tell me. They said, well, you know, what's the problem? Everybody signs these. I said, well, I don't. What is the consent for? How can I consent to something? I don't know what it is. They said, well, it's always a consent for whatever the doctor thinks is important. I said, I need to know what that is. You know, of course, I've worked in healthcare and I've worked in ER and I've seen things that people shouldn't have to see. So I know better than to do that. So, but the masses, it's kind of like the doctors and nurses, and I'm still a nurse. We're the angels of mercy, and we're the ones that are going to heal you. And so people put their lives in the hands. But anyway, she hung up and said, because she was just tired of wasting her time but all she wanted was a verbal consent, not even written, for the doctor to do whatever the doctor thought was important. So yes, you do. If you're going into surgery, you should not be signing a paper unless you know exactly what they're going to do and what the risk factors are. No one should be taking a pill, not even aspirin. We started giving aspirins back in the 70s because it was a simple little tiny baby aspirin, and it must be healthy and there's no problem. And yet in October 2021, they came out, I don't know if it was the CDC or which one of the regulatory agencies, and said the risk outweighs the benefits. Some 50 years after I started giving it. So these things, the idea that something is safe that just hit the ground, and you know, and I'm sure that some of the other medical people here remember, I don't remember the name of some, I'll say Professor Lloyd, we'll say Professor Lisa, if you remember back, I don't know if you're in my age range, where there was something given to women, and it was 20 years later when they discovered that was causing deformities in babies. So it's up to the person, is your body, to read the paper, right? And then to say, I don't understand this, you know, and not to feel bad if you don't. Just, I don't understand, help me understand. Oh, that's it, yep, you remember, yep. And it took a while, but, and the same thing happened. I just saw the movie on Teflon. I used to love Teflon, that some of those products caused a lot of problems, a lot of toxins. There's so many things like that. Something as simple as Windex and bleach that we use at home has an MSDS sheet. So the information is somewhere. And some of those, if you look at the MSDS sheet, it says on there that you need masks and goggles just to clean your windows. So I see,
Juliet.
Yes, so I wanted to make sure I answered Dr. Russell. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, yeah, that makes sense. But I was wondering if I can hear the second point, but I just wait until Juliet then.
Okay.
But,
yeah,
go ahead.
The second question I have is that in US, they have this so-called DO, Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine.
Yes.
That basically dealing with more on the preventive aspect as well as comprehensive approach in terms of environment and so on. Do they have a similar thing in Africa, for example, or some of the poor countries?
Well, that's a bit outside the scope of this particular discussion. Perhaps we could have Juliet to ask her question. Thank you.
Can I give some kind of answer though?
Please, briefly.
Okay, very briefly. Okay, what I would say, and what coming from this or being administrative leader, whatever with it, I recommend that we're able to help educate people. It's trying to figure out which doctors, which is whatever. If you know to ask the question, you know, read the informed consent, ask the question if you're getting surgery, ask the question about the medication, ask the question, anything you put in whether you're going to the pharmacy, whether it's Coca-Cola or lemonade or Kool-Aid, ask about the ingredients and what the side effects are. Let's make each one, as many people as possible, self-advocating. I guess it's what I would advocate for. So hopefully that's helpful. You can't know, because you can know a lot. There's a movie about a family that the doctors couldn't figure out what to do, and they spent years themselves researching, and they came up with a treatment that the doctors adopted. So just because we're not doctors doesn't mean we can't pick up a book and start doing research.
Juliet, your question.
Juliet.
Okay. Good evening, and I guess good morning on everybody's side. Just a disclaimer, I think there could be some confusion in terms of time. You might be able to see people coming in only now, but I'm not going to speak for everyone. But you might see some movement, which is, but nonetheless, I'm here. My question is, it's actually related to what Dr. Risley asked. in most African countries, there's a high level of illiteracy. And normally, the discussion now is people giving consent, people reading, and in most cases, people take themselves or they go with the illiterate relatives to hospitals. So it's always not so practical in most communities, particularly because in most African countries, people are dependent on government hospitals. And normally there you walk in, you're almost treated like a robot. You go in, you sign, a brief explanation is given. So the issue of illiteracy comes in and it affects this issue consent. And also the issue of, it's not just illiteracy, but also the hospitals are so inundated with so many patients and they're not coping, that the ability in a public hospital to even ask a question is almost limited, unless you like myself, where you almost insist. You'll be given the look, but you will insist on an explanation. But generally people just go ahead and sign, and then later, that is why our governments, particularly in South Africa, they're always sued later. But this is normally after the fact. They're sued for having done a procedure without properly consenting or without explaining. And this is when the lawyers make money. So it's very interesting that it's quite a difficult dynamic in most African countries. I know even in South Africa, it is a challenge. And then the other aspect that I wanted to raise
Can I address that really? I would like to address that real quickly. Is that, and understood, yeah, the literacy rate is important, but here's what I'm, I like to use the word systemic. In the United States, and I said the whole Western world, I mean, I know a bunch of people with PhDs, they don't read their labels. They don't read the side effects. They do not ask questions. So it is critical for people to be literate, but I guess what we have the power to control is, one, if we can get some community activists, health educators and advocates, they can help, but whoever it is, I've worked with nurses. I have friends right now who are nurses. They don't ask the questions that I ask. So it's really about us getting a group like have talked about, advocates in the community who don't mind asking. Most people like to be liked, and they like to, something, it can be intimidating. And even the doctors, now, they may be suing in South Africa. The places here, the hospitals have a whole new system, and it's not as easy to sue because they're now bought out by corporations. So there's a system that no matter where you are, it may be literacy in South Africa, but it's something else in Chicago or Kansas City or whatever that keeps people still from asking questions or knowing their rights. But go ahead with your second question. I just want to throw that out.
Okay, thank you for that. Then the second one of the typical issues that we deal with when I work with the elderly, because I have a program of the elderly, is that you have a lot of the elderly saying that a particular doctor, and I'm going to be more specific because it seems like it's being done mainly by the Indian doctors in the townships. It is known that the Indian doctors, they do certain trials on the elderly, obviously the elderly who don't even know that that's a trial. They get given certain medication that they're being informed that it will help them with this, with that, with diabetes. And obviously with that trial, you have to sign. And there are two issues to that. One of the first issues is that normally those trials, when you look on the internet, anyone who goes on that trial would have to be paid a certain amount of money. And the elderly, they don't even know that that's the fact, that for them to consent to that trial, they would have to get some form of money, whatever it is. They're not aware of that. So they're actually being robbed because that money ultimately ends up with the doctor. But then the second one is, I don't know if it still comes back to the issue of consent, as in if trials are packaged to help someone and someone is being explained that, no, this will help in this way and that way. How do we go about dealing with it? Because it seems to be like a growing trend, especially now that we're in a global world and things are brought here to be tried and tested, people being used as guinea pigs by medical doctors at the local level. but you know what, adults signed, people signed, and that's their argument, you see. I don't know if you are aware of situations like those.
Oh yeah, yeah. Of course we have those, because I think some things get tried in the West first. Sometimes they may be tried in Africa or India. And in terms of the doctors, the Indian doctors and all that, and I just went through a year, like I said, with my sister, and I'm pretty well versed on doing research. One doctor did stop 5 medicines for me, which shocked me. But what happens again, it's a system. Many hospitals, when I first started in healthcare, were faith-based. They were Methodist, they were Jewish, they were Catholic or whatever. Most of those now have been bought out by corporations. And so they have stakeholders and stockholders. And so they have doctors that they bring in from other countries. They pay their student loans and they put them on something. They have new titles called hospitalists. And so it's not a particular country. It could be, from, I don't know, some part of Europe, it can be from India, it could be anywhere, but it gives an advantage because they're able to, one, work in the Western world, they're able to get a certain salary, gets a control system. So they order whatever the hospital administers. So it's not the old fashioned medical doctor with private practice, the whole system. And I like to emphasize that because sometimes it's not personality based, it's principle based. And so understanding that the best, and here, this is a place here in this forum, we can talk about what other solutions. The one that I particularly do is advocacy, having educators who are educated, but not so educated. I know health educators who are sold on the system. They believe if they say it's ABC, it must be ABC. I like the video that talked about Canada having artificial blood, and they won't start to 2017 when everything is safe and it looks like they're taking step by step. Yet United States had already did it in 2005 and 6, and folks obviously died because the FDA shut them down, gave them a waiver where they didn't have to ask any patient, they could just give it, and yet they shut them down on the spot. So I'm saying we're in a situation where we really need to just educate. I think that's what this forum was put together for. And I see Prince Andrew's hand, so I will go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. If I may, I'd like to share a brief 2-minute video at this point.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, thank you, because the issues that we're dealing with are all relevant to health in particular. But earlier, you did share your screen and shared with us the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
I'd like to now share the screen about our 30 human rights, because at the end of the day, I'm believing that as much as we can ground everything we're doing into the area of human rights, that cuts across borders, it cuts across cultures, and it allows us to all have a basis for which we can begin to work with. It cuts across cultures, and it allows us to all have a basis for which we can begin to work with. It cuts across cultures, and it allows us to all have a basis for which we can begin to work with.
And if you would send me the link as well, that would be great. And if you would send me the link as well, that would be great. Echo. And if you would send me the link as well, that would be great. Echo. And if you would send me the link as well, that would be great. Echo. And if you would send me the link as well, that would be great.
thank you for that opportunity. And I will share the link in the chat. But again, I hope that what we can all do in every one of our events is to ground us in a commonality that we can use to then engage our various communities from this standpoint. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and that's really helpful. Anytime, we have these, if you have something like that to bring to, I have a couple of videos that I've gotten from Prince Andrew in the past, one on sustainable goals that's helpful. So that's what we do anyway, and the work we do here with Healing Circles is that we're all looking and we find something different. We share that in terms of as a resource when you're doing the work, because all of this is about each one teach one, 30 human rights. That is wonderful. Yeah, because all over the world where everybody should have the rights, it just doesn't show up. And I guess I emphasize, Madam Juliet, that I know that Africa has been through a very, very tough time. And so it's been as though what I guess my point is that in the United States, you'd be amazed at what actually happens here, because we were the country that did the blood trials without the consent. I heard Canada, when I saw that video, that they wouldn't even do anything until they got volunteers and they did this and that. Not so. So sometimes it's sort of a myth that people think that in certain countries that you won't have this, in other countries you just have that. So that's what I want to share. Anybody else, what some other topics we can bring? I highlighted informed consent today, but again, and the one on medical apartheid talk, it's only about abuses against people of African descent in America for 400 years, but it is compelling. And so everything that I bring will not just be about African American, but there are some things that happen on a level that hasn't happened. I know that, like with the Jewish population, 6 million Jews were, put through hell. And so it's and we know if you say Holocaust, you got a vivid image of something that absolutely should not happen. Yet when we say Holocaust, we don't think of the millions of Africans and millions of Native Americans. So some of it's just a reframing our thinking that some of these things are really about all of us. So it's not designed to be just about one people, but just know that it took everybody for some of these things to happen, either through silence or either through action or avoidance or whatever. So that's just how that goes. But we're in a space now where we're able to use whatever resources we have to be able to make a difference for everyone. And that's why the focus really is on all humanity. So anybody else? What's any other topics? We got a few more minutes that we can put in the mix for as we go forward. Yes, Juliet.
Yes, thank you. I'm raising this. I know that I've raised it before as a concern, which, and I see the people on the platform. I actually think it's actually directed to most of the participants that are here on the platform, who are mainly the stakeholders of the programs that we do. The concern that I raised was that I think we are heading to almost 1 billion people in Africa. And then we have about 1 billion and more maybe in China, maybe another 1 billion in India. My numbers might be incorrect. And then I was emphasizing the fact that Africa is a continent. It is not a country. Okay. Mm-hmm. And if see, I tend to pick up that in our discussion, and Prophet, this is not just with you. I think generally when we speak on this global unity platform, I tend to pick up unfortunate innuendos that almost make it seem as if Africa is a homogeneous continent. Yet we know that maybe Prince Andrew will know that Botswana, which is literally a stone throw away from South Africa, is far different, even in exercising human rights. It's far different from South Africa. I mean, there you hit someone by a car, you might find yourself being hanged or finding life imprisonment. While in South Africa, you might find yourself being hanged or finding life imprisonment. While in South Africa, you might might find yourself being, what should I do? Hanged or finding life imprisonment. While in South Africa, you might find Can I continue? Because I didn't finish and I'm just hearing my voice, which is not a nice thing to hear either. So, all right, no, it stopped. Can I, then I think it's more of a word of caution, because within the African continent, we've got different religions, we've got different value systems, you know, even the principle of Ubuntu. I've found that we've had to explain that to our brothers in East Africa or Central Africa in terms of what that means, because that also doesn't apply right across. So the point I'd like to make is, when we look at, I know Dr. Rusli, we did say that we need to look at something that could be applied across the continent. And then my advice was, if we take things, if we look at 5 countries that have certain similarities and we implement, and then in another 5 that also has similarities in values or whatever else, then we implement, rather than taking a blanket approach. Because with a blanket approach, my worry is something could fail, a good project could fail, because maybe it was rejected or did not do well in a particular country. So, yeah, I think it's a word of caution. And also my take is that if we look at similarities, for instance, when we're talking about Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Uganda, it's because there are specific societal similarities that will make the program work. And then when we go to maybe Cameroon and Nigeria and elsewhere, we might have to tweak the program. So, but I think it's just a general point that I need to point out there. I know it's all systematic, but I'm talking more in terms of implementation of projects and programs.
And we appreciate that, and we have had the conversation. And I'll just say this, because I continue to hold a systemic view. And it depends. I've done grassroots work, and I also have done work at another level. So what I find, at least throughout history, the reason why it was possible to do some things, conquer whole countries and almost whole continent, was because the strategists had a plan that worked across the board. Now, they all didn't do the same, but it's kind of, you know, so I do understand. I think with the programs, we haven't covered much today. I don't know if you were in at the beginning. The original agenda did have a discussion about the pilot program of Mari, but I took that off the table because this business of informed consent popped up, and it seemed to be something, one that seems to be a concern, at least across this country, and I was concerned about whether it was a concern in parts of Africa. But yeah, any of the circles, any of the things that that I've seen, or any of the work, they all, and everybody that I work with understands that we have to adapt it to the culture, the language, and that's a part of the proper preparation, which is what we're doing. Like right now with Haiti, we haven't jumped into Haiti. I don't know Creole, I don't know French, you know, I don't know the culture, but we've been working with the Haitian neuroscientists to find out what their culture is, their symbols, their songs, their language. I mean, even within Haiti, some speak Creole, some speak French, some speak English, some are Christian, some are Muslim. And so it's that way, and not to minimize it, because I do understand what you're saying. I'm just wanting to emphasize that that has been factored in. I'm real clear that it's a continent. I'm real clear that there's a lot of countries, and those that I work with are clear as well. So the so yeah, I don't know if that makes it any better for you, but yeah, it's. I mean, I was the one that designed some of the first pieces for Haiti. I know nothing. I didn't even know their whole history, but it wound up being the very first one wound up being successful. Just I think some of it has to do with empathy, not sympathy. Going to India, going to even to England and meeting people from Egypt and Wales on a street corner, I found that there was something that connected us. I don't know how to put it in tangible words and stuff, but there's something that empathy around people and what their needs are. It just has to be in place no matter where you are. I see now, Prince Andrew, is your hand still up, or did you put it up again? Or?
Well, yeah, I did raise it again, and I would like to ask for at least this session to focus on the specific topic that we have for today.
Yes. Yes,
but in general, in addressing Juliet, just as I referred back to the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights as a kind of a level playing field to begin with. When you are talking about Africa, again, it's critically important to understand that the African Union itself, which claims to represent, at this point, 54 of the 55 countries, actually has a roadmap that itself was based upon what's called the Common African Position on the Post-Millennium Development Goals back in 2015. That actually preceded the Sustainable Development Goals in September of that year. But there is a roadmap of over 20 targets for the African Union that overlaps the things that we're doing for the Sustainable Development Goals worldwide. But in particular about your message about Africa is a continent, not a country. Each of the African countries has its own diaspora commission, or at least it was proposed in Sandton, South Africa, that be done. So that each of the countries has a specific outreach to the members of the diaspora, not just in the Western world, but also on the continent of Africa. So Juliet, I would suggest the idea perhaps for us to identify what the existing frameworks are, so that when we address a particular issue, we can reach to existing quantifiable content and verifiable information that gives us, I think, a stronger leverage in discussing whatever topic we have in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, yeah, going forward, and so, but for today, as I was saying to Madam Juliet, I shifted the agenda just because this popped up as critical that we need, if we're going to continue these meetings around health and health equity across Africa. And of course, Professor Lloyd can jump in to say if this is just health in Africa, it said unity, so I wasn't sure if it was global. But the idea, my observation, just engaging with people in different parts of the globe, is that the average person, the masses, are not informed when they get medical care, and that they're more comfortable sometimes with hoping and trusting that the people who provide that care, one, know what they're doing, two, that they have the kind of empathy and care for who they are as a person. And that, and sometimes they do, but they're doing the best they can. I knew a doctor, very, very nice doctor. Everybody liked him, but he was an alcoholic. He had to be drunk before he could do surgery. So he was a nice guy. So it's not necessarily that people are mean all the time, but people are people. It's like a mechanic, you don't trust every mechanic. But so it's just good to ask questions. So the piece that I'm inserting today, but I'm asking from you all, what else you want talked about on this health forum? What are the health issues? Are there particular, I know, Juliet, you said before, like HIV, what's going on with HIV? Years ago, I heard about Promethra, which was supposed to come out of Africa and didn't have the side effects of some of the antiretrovirals. But I haven't heard of anything else about it. So there's a lot out there that anybody, what's going on in terms of health and wellness, and what would be something that would be of some help in your communities.
May I say something?
Oh, absolutely.
All right, sorry. Prince Andrew, thank you for that pointer. Yes, and it's noted, and I hear what you're saying, including the prophet. I think I was just alluding more to the point when we actually implement programs and projects that we just need to take into account some of the local dynamics that we have to factor into our different projects. Working with children and youth, Prophet, the issue of menstrual health, the issue of sexually transmitted diseases, the issue of, because when you deal with the elderly, you have your obvious issues of diabetes, sugar, and all that. But when it comes to, normally people don't want to touch on the issues of STIs that children have to deal with. And most of the time, children wouldn't even be sent to the clinic because of shame, or maybe children wouldn't even talk about it. And those things would later then lead to girls or women having cervical cancer. Because logically it says that if there's a high rate of child molestation or rape of children, it then means that other than HIV/AIDS, there could be other illnesses. So that's one of the topics that we're going to have to find a way of touching on, but in a very direct but empathetic way, you know, and also sensitive way. I know that when I can raise that issue with a child and say, oh, you're saying you itchy, have you spoken to your mom? And says, no, I can't talk to my mom. I can't talk to my teacher. You see, so if we can look at some of those factors, and also the fact that some of the children, we have a lot of child-headed households where children live on their own, where if a child could be going through a discharge or an abnormal situation in their vaginal part, they would have no one to talk to about, because they've been told that's not something you talk about. So there would be sectors where, firstly, within communities where we deal with the elderly, who normally work with children, who raise children, the women, the mothers themselves, and the children themselves, how to get comfortable about issues like that. And also, I mean, I avoid bring in our public health system, because I know the attitude at times. They're the ones who tend children, who actually reprimand them. Why do you have this disease? What's wrong with you? See, that's more judgmental. So in our programs, if we can also please include such issues, particularly for girl children, in order to prevent serious illnesses going forward for them. At the age of 12, there's a consent age. Fortunately, in South Africa, the age of consent is 12. So a girl child or a child can agree to an operation or to anything from the age of 12, which is beneficial, because if we find out something, that child can actually go to hospital without even telling their parents if it's something that needs to be treated. So this is where one of a few times where the policy works in our favor. Okay, I think I've said enough in terms of that.
I think that's good. One thing I would say, though, I'm 72, so I think the idea that elderly have diabetes, high blood pressure, it's another topic you didn't elaborate, but that may be something we can put on for the grandmothers. I'm still learning the word bokoko, that they don't have to have. I mean, my grandmother's 107 and she didn't have it. Some of that so prevention that comes in the area, the prevention, how to prevent those kinds of things. There were some women I met from Somalia in Kansas City, and they were in refugee camps for years. They never had diabetes, high blood pressure, any of that until they got to the Western world. So we can maybe add, so a lot of this would go into the program around, or pilot even, when we do the elder women, that there's health education at all these different levels. As for the girls, yes, absolutely, to be able, and I used to do a STD, sexually transmitted diseases training for the local community. So I'm real comfortable at doing it. People aren't always comfortable with how I do it, because you're either going to do it or not do it, right? And so years ago, I was doing physicals for 0 to 21, and I had a young man who was 16. And so people are like, well, you can't do certain conversations. But I say you have to, and you have to be clear, and you have to do it in a way. And nursing, the first thing they teach us is being non-judgmental kind of an attitude. That's how you, not just but matter of fact. No, they call it matter of fact. You have to do it in a matter of fact way. This young man, when I asked him about using birth control with his girlfriend, he said, oh, absolutely. I know what yes, we got that covered. But if I hadn't taken the extra step to say, okay, tell me exactly what you do, I would have missed the fact. He said that they were using a diaphragm. You know what that is? And I said, okay, so another question, how do you use the diaphragm? If I would have taken just the diaphragm, I wouldn't have known that he said they put it in after they have sex. Well, no, that's not when you put it in. So you have to be able to, when you get in those kind of topics, to be comfortable enough to do it in a matter-of-fact way, so that young people will open up and tell you what's going on. So I think that's a great one. And that has different dimensions to it that you're talking about, but it all really fits under health education and making it, age specific, population specific, and that's all part of the design for both populations. I see Dr. Rusi has his hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering if can we have a subject where maybe we can improve the the healthcare of the poor people. In terms of, I would think there will be some difference between the treatment or availability of the doctor, availability of the nurse in the rural area, in the poor area. I think we should somehow have a specific maybe topic that dealing with how do we improve this healthcare for these people that they need it.
Yes, I said absolutely. And I don't want to make it seem like everything is so easy. I'm not saying that. It's just that I like to, someone said, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it. But in some ways, if we know our history, we can benefit from it because, of course, up until a little over 100 years ago, a lot of people didn't go to hospitals. You know, everybody was not dropping dead. I mean, I have ancestors that lived quite a long time. So some of it is just drilling down, getting a group from Juliet talked about 5 countries, part because all of this actually can fit in terms of a pilot, can fit under Andrea's put down digital health data platform. Yeah, we have a lot of things that we can work with now. And then Lisa also has some researchers, but getting some health advocates out there, and these grandmothers, we can teach them. They don't have to know how to read the information, because I've taught people who barely spoke English. And so we can do that, get the information, but people thinking of themselves first as their first person, the first advocate is themselves. It's not somebody out in the city in a big hospital who's going through and it's still got to go back home. Knowing as much as you can about your body, how it works, even in terms of the young girls and the discharges, whatever it's from, whether it's poor hygiene or whether it's from some abuse, knowing something about their bodies, because people have been cleaning, women have been cleaning, and men, but women have been cleaning their vaginal area and all that for a very, very long time. And so there are strategies, some of the things that, and again, not to oversimplify, and I'm going to have to sign off in 4 minutes. So just because I have a child to pick, because I'm a grandmother, we're talking about the grandmothers, and around the world, I happen to be one of them that multitask with my grandchildren. But I see Prince Andrew has a hand up, and I thought I saw it said 2 hands were up. Who's the other? Go ahead, Prince Andrew.
Yes, thank you so much. In indirect response to Erwin's comment, there is in the chat there, Afia Record. I put it on the screen. Among our Goodwill ambassadors for the Yakba Network is John Camara. I had the opportunity to meet him when he traveled here to Los Angeles several years ago, but he has launched in Africa, Afia Record. It's a patient-driven health data platform built on AI and blockchain technology, specifically designed for people in the rural community. In Kenya, where his launch began about 8 months ago, they worked with a network of hospitals that were managed and owned by the Catholic Church. There were about 4 million members. They were able to install or to provide to them an app that allowed up to 100,000 of those patients to be able to be not only in control of their own health data, but to utilize technology to provide that to any of their healthcare providers. I just bring that up as an example to you, Erwan, of us doing our due diligence to first determine what's available, and then perhaps finding out how we might adapt it to other locations locally and internationally, but also here in the United States. All too often, the West has been looked upon as, quote, a first world nation. But as you know, the African continent was able to leapfrog technology, particularly in the mobile data and mobile banking and other areas. So I think it's incumbent upon us to find ways we can reintegrate these advances that are now shared worldwide from the African continent back into the mainstream society. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now we can wrap this up and put a pin in it, and we can get ready for your event in 2 weeks from now. And that gives you, Lisa, an opportunity to get ready for your event next week. But the floor is open before we close.
Any
and my event tomorrow?
There is another event tomorrow, yes. Yes, okay, I know, I agree completely. I think we should leapfrogging the technology for Africa. We cannot wait for the development in the developed countries, because for this particular need is so strong over there in Africa. So yes. I think this will be a good platform.
I think it would be good. And so let me just, there's an echo.
I just want to say that.
Hold on, Juliet. Hold on, Juliet. Let me just wrap this up. Yeah, just let me. I'm trying to get the echo out. Is that on the screen, and Prince Andrew? So, Dr. Rusi, what I would like to say, and I guess to everyone, as we go forth with the Unity Health, and I think it's critical to bring in that technology would do wonders. What I would like to see, this is only personal, and that's my disclaimer, which is why I'm so excited to be here. My passion is around making sure that we don't repeat past mistakes, so that whatever comes in, that it doesn't bring the same abuses that the past had in. So that was it. Go ahead, Juliet, and I'll start wrapping up because I got a 15-minute drive to get him.
No, I think I'm covered more or less by what Dr. Rusi was saying, that the combination of the technology that Prince Andrew just highlighted now, plus the call center that I've been talking about and I'll be proposing, and your service, it ties everything well in terms of Africa using the cell phone technology that is available. And some of these issues that are not dealt with, whether it's by 12-year-old or 8-year-olds, then they can access the health and the help through all this technology combination. Thank you so much.
9:40.
Absolutely.
9:45. Prophet.
All right, time for me. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for coming. Good discussion. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Okay, before I end it for everyone, I will give you a chance to save the chat if you so choose, and I'll do a closing out gallery share. So anyone that wants to show their video, we can wave goodbye. We do have an audience on Facebook, and this will be part of our recording. So we may as well.
I don't have a wave. I can put up my little excitement thing there. my camera's still messed up. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, we love you so much.
Thank you all.
All right, Rose, you're the last one in. How about a wave, Rose? Are you able to join us? If not, I'm about to share my screen for the final wrap up here, and we're gonna go.
I don't know why I've been struggling with where do I press to save the chats? It's embarrassing for me to ask this question now. I know we're not recording, so I can ask and be embarrassed, but it's okay.
Well, we are recording, but you can't ask. But only if you're on your computer at the bottom right next to the chat,
cell phone.
Then I'll have to share the chat with you or anyone here.
I'll send you the chat. I'll send you the chat.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Okay.
Since I led the meeting, I like to be the last to leave. Can you go ahead and click on Prince Andrew?
Oh no, because we want to stay and talk about you.
You're supposed to leave. Everybody else goes. So you go ahead and go. We'll talk about you.
No, I'm staying. You go and pick up your grandchild.
No, well,
bye-bye.
Why don't we both stay and we talk about each other? Bye.
Bye.